Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee. It is the 16th of July. My name is Amanda Brown. I'm the Clerk and Monitoring Officer for Avon Fire Authority, and welcome you to this meeting. The reason I'm kicking off the meeting this morning is this is the first meeting of the new municipal year, and the first item on the agenda is the election of the chair for the municipal year. So can I have a proposer, please?
Councillor Payne.
Councillor Payne, thank you. So that was proposed by Councillor Eddy, and do I have a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor Nutland. Thank you very much, and congratulations, Councillor Payne. I'll hand over the script.
Thank you very much for electing me as the chair. We move on to apologies for absence. I believe we have apologies from Councillor Davis and Councillor May.
And we don't seem to have Councillor Ali, so we'll take that as an apology at this stage.
Okay. So we are just about forward. Next is emergency evacuation procedures. Most of it was covered on the video, I think, but Steve, would you like?
Yes, Chair. As the Chair said, most of it was covered on the video, but if there was a need to evacuate the building, follow me out the door. We'll make our way outside to the nearest exit, and then we'll go to the appropriate muster point thereafter.
But isn't it true, actually, as we say at the HQ, that the firefighters should be running towards the fire, not away?
I think it depends on the colour of their shirt.
Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Next item is Chair's business. Under this, first of all, I'd like to ask members to introduce themselves for the benefit of anybody who's watching on YouTube after the meeting. So I'll start. My name is Robert Payne. I'm the councillor for Western Central and North Somerset Council.
I'm Richard Ed, councillor for Bishopsworth and Bristol. I've been a member of the authority for, I think, 4 years.
Thank you. I'm Adam Monk, I'm a councillor for Filton in South Gloucestershire.
I'm Ben Nutland, I'm the councillor for Gate North in South Gloucestershire.
Thank you. And if I could ask, first of all, can I welcome the new Ben as a new member of the authority, and Adam, new to this committee. Thank you for joining us. And if I could ask officers to introduce themselves as well, please.
Yeah, Temporary Assistant Chief Officer Steve Imrie.
I'm Helen Excel, I'm PA for Steve, and I'm based in the Principal Officer's Suite at HQ.
Thank you.
Amanda Brown, Clerk and Monitoring Officer.
Samuel Cox, a few minutes today.
Thank you. And the other officers who will be presenting papers later on, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves as they come forward. Thank you. Now, normally we have at the July meeting the Collaboration and Partnership Working Report, but since this was presented to the Fire Authority meeting on the 30th of June, we haven't got this, and the next report will be in January. Right. So when we come to votes, I shall take votes by a show of hands in the order of votes against, abstentions, and then votes for. Right, so if we move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of April.
Can I move that during after check?
You may. Is there anybody who want to ask any questions or make any comments? Okay. Everyone.
Someone second.
Have a seconder?
I wasn't here, so
I'll second it. I'll second it. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you.
Right, I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Next item is public access. We have none. So we'll move on to 8, which is the performance report, and Simon Flood will be presenting it.
Thank you. Just like last time, my specialist subject.
Take notes. You've got your
Oh,
thing already.
done already. Good morning, councillors and colleagues. My name's Simon Flood. I'm Performance Manager for Avon Fire and Rescue Service. As usual with the performance, what we've got tabled for you is two of the main products that we produce to help guide performance within organisations and the public. So the first one is our corporate scorecard, which looks like this, which is Appendix A, Appendix 1 of the papers. This is all of our key measures that we report against the Fire Authority. What we've done since the last meeting, you may notice, is that we've split them into the two things that we're trying to achieve, which is the safer community measures and also the stronger service measures. So if you like, the safer community ones are the ones that are outputs affecting the general public, the number of fires that we attend, etc., etc. And the stronger service ones are ones that affect more us internally, but also have an impact upon the public. So for instance, within the stronger service, you'll see the information about the sickness within the service, which obviously we're trying to drive down. So no direct impact upon the strong, safer community, but obviously if we have more people available, then we've got more resources available to achieve what we're looking to achieve. The second one, which is Appendix 2 in the papers, is our war charts. We produce these at Avon level and also at unitary authority and at station level. The newest ones of these should be produced on Monday, which will have the information for the first 3 months of the year, because what we're looking at here is the first 2 months of the year. But on Monday we'll have the first 3 months, and those will be sent out to the member station champions that I understand have just been reallocated. So they should be sent out by Emma as soon as they're available as appropriate. The war chart is a subset of the current information that is found on the scorecard, but it's just done in a more graphic format and is displayed on stations, hopefully to assist the station staff in understanding their performance. On both of them, we use a very simple red, amber, green, the RAG methodology. So red indicates indicators that are off target, amber indicates stuff that is near to target, and green indicates things that are on target and going where we want to be. So within the report itself, I've highlighted some information about that. So almost all of our incident indicators are proceeding well and are on target and shown as green. There is one that is showing amber, which is deliberate primary fires. We had a high number of them in April. With April being a lot drier than we usually expected in April, we had a high number of those incidents, which tend to be outside things like setting lights to structures like toilets and things like that. So we had a high number of those. Numbers reduced in May, and it's not in the papers been sent to you, but pleased to report that we've run the data for June, but it's too late to include in the papers that were sent to you. But the figures for June are encouraging as well. So that indicator at the end of June is back on target, which is good news. So to look at the two things on the corporate indicators that are off target, the first one relates to our community fire safety activity. So within our service plan, we set out some anticipated activity for the number of home fire safety visits, education visits, and community events that we attend. So we've set that out as a numerical number. We've described as an anticipated activity, and we're going to measure or not whether we achieve that. After 2 months of the year, you can see that we are well down on those numbers, but at the moment I think we're suffering still from the COVID restrictions that are impacting upon what we can do within the community. So our plan is once we move out of the COVID area, which is what everything's going to be, then we will be able to increase the volume of the activity to get back to where we used to be before the pandemic, which is what the anticipated activity is showing. The other one that we've talked about a number of times in this committee, where we're still off target, is completion of personal development reviews. Our target is to make sure that every staff has a constant review of PDR within 12 months of their last event. And we're looking to achieve that for 95% of the time. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're only achieving 84%. Our reporting on it is reasonably sophisticated, so it takes out anybody who is off long-term absence, and when they come back from long-term absence, it allows a 28-day period of grace to get performance review done if it's out of date. But unfortunately, we're stalled with that improvement. What I'd say to members is we have a service leadership team next week, and it's on the agenda there, coming up with an action plan to see how we're going to improve, because we're stalled at the moment a little bit. So it's not what we want to be, but we're going to be working to try and make that better. So that's really all I wanted to say with regard to the current performance, the April-May of so far this year. Do we want to pause before we move on to the second part, which is introducing performance reports for the last financial year, and invite any questions with regard to the current performance?
Okay, good.
Simon, I've got a few points. The first one I should really ought to record, because I've said something similar for the last two meetings, but in my view it's worth repeating, which is realistically with COVID and with all the transformational programs we have, I think it's quite creditworthy. We've actually got so much positive performance detail, so well done for that. Well done for your colleagues. I completely accept what you say about community activity, of course. It's hopefully we're beginning to see a change, but we're not there yet. I'm also pleased to see we made progress on things like the return to work interviews, which has been something for a while we were concerned about. And again, that's quite very treasure-worthy. I've got two questions. Firstly, did the sickness figures, which we accept it's an ongoing work in progress issue, did the sickness figures include self-isolation cases, or are they just not, they're not registered as or termed as sick cases, they're just unavailable for work?
Yes, we certainly record that. So we record it in four main ways. So the people who actually are ill with COVID, three main ways, excuse me. People who have to isolate due to COVID but actually are well enough to work, but whether or not they can work for us very much depends on the nature of the duties that they're doing. So some people are able to work from home in their duties. An operational firefighter, it's less easy to be effective as a firefighter when you're at home. But also people who are off sick due to having the immunisation, the jab. Yes. So what we do with those is we measure it, but we don't include it in the headline sickness figures. And that was a definite decision we made as a leadership team, with the thought that if we didn't, you would see a spike, and we'd always be explaining, well, that's not a true spike because it's including an exceptional event. So we've got that information, but it isn't included in these numbers.
No, that's perfectly sensible. I don't have an issue with that. My last question was the staff appraisal figures. Obviously, that's a bit disappointing. How are we trying to address that?
Yeah, well, certainly, as I say, it's on the agenda for next week's service leadership team. What we're doing with the service leadership team is simply just changing it. So rather than being led by myself, which it previously was doing, what we're looking to do is to, as you can see on the scorecard, we've now highlighted which of our directors are responsible for each of the indicators. So it would be a responsibility for that director, if you'd like to lead the discussion, to say first one or two things. Are we happy to tolerate the output currently, or do we wish to treat it? So if it's just off target, early in the year, numbers are low, we might be saying actually we're tolerating it because we don't think it merits intervention currently. But if we do want to treat it, then what are we going to do to treat it? And there are a number of things that we've done in the past that we could do with regard to if you like, communicating the need. I know we're looking at doing some training sessions with managers, with new managers who perhaps are unused to conducting those sort of interviews and things, because everyone has gone through training before who were existing managers, but new managers may not have been exposed to that. So it may just be something that either they're not aware of, or they're not entirely sure how to do, things like that. So there's lots I think we can do. And it's one of those things, as I say, it's purely within our grasp to achieve. There's nothing unlike fires where we can't control, but we can influence the number of fires that happen. Whether or not a PDR happens, we can definitely control it. So it's looking to, yeah. So I'm very hopeful that when we come back again in 3 months' time or so, we will see positive improvement there. Thank you.
Look forward to that.
Fingers crossed.
Any other questions?
The last bit I was just going to
Sorry,
like, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Just a quick one. Simon, obviously you haven't included the figures for COVID-related cases in the staff absences. Are those figures available separately? And in terms of those figures, what kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of staff-related absences?
Yes, there were more last financial year than in this current year. So numbers in this current year are reasonably low. Unfortunately, what I've got, I haven't got it right in front of me, but I can get it out this afternoon. So if I forward that on, we can circulate that round. But it does make a difference to them.
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I just didn't hear that correctly. Did you say the numbers are lower this year than previous years?
Yes, so in the first 2 months of this current financial year, we've had fewer absences with regard to COVID than we did in the last financial year.
Okay, yeah.
That makes sense.
You'd hope that would be.
2 months.
Yes, but proportionally, I suppose, because you expect 2 months compared to 12.
Yeah.
So yes, that's the point. But yeah, proportionally, it's lower than it was. Yes. Thank you. The last thing I just wanted to say, I meant to say that with regard to the sickness. Paragraph 511 of the report makes reference to the benchmarking indicators. So it's purely voluntary. It's done through the National Fire Chiefs Council, but it allows fire and rescue services who want to take part to benchmark their sickness rates against each other. When we started our improvement programme, because we're in the third year of that, 2 years ago, we were unfortunately on the left-hand side, showing that we didn't benchmark very favourably compared to other fire and rescue services. But you can see we've made some good progress on there. It's obviously it's not always an exact science, because we're trying to, if you like, measure the average of the other fire and rescue services as it was 2 years ago, but a lot of them are also reducing their sickness as well. So if we achieve what we're looking to achieve, it's not 100% sure that we'll still meet the average, but we are improving. And our comparative compared to others, we're certainly moving along towards the right-hand side of the graph compared to the left-hand side, which is where we want to be. Okay. The other thing I was just going to say with regard to the performance report itself, which is looking at last financial year, there's one thing that is slightly different on it, and one apology from myself. So the first thing that is slightly different is we've put a draft bench of watermark on there, which we didn't do previously. So though in some ways this is published because it's included in the papers for this meeting, it's trying to indicate that it's not yet a finished document because it requires people on the committee to approve. The other thing I just wanted to make reference to, and not really sure how this happened, it must have happened right at the end, but some of the page ordering has gone out of sync. So page 13, which includes information about the Magistrates Inspector of Constabulary, is been inserted in the correct or in an incorrect place. So it should be after the resources and value for money bit, which is on page 14. So many apologies for that. It must have been a very last minute thing, because certainly on the last draft that I saw, it was in the correct place, but we'll make sure that's corrected before it's actually published.
So is it just simply a case that what's on page 13 will have the content from page 14 and vice versa?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
It's just been inserted. So it should come at the end of the resources and value for money environmental part, should then go on to the HMRC part. So apologies for that. Other than that, this is the third year of our performance report in its new format. It used to be a statutory requirement under the best value performance regime. Once that was abolished, it's no longer statutory that we publish a performance report, but certainly as a leadership team, we think it's a very good thing to do to let the public know how it is we're achieving this on fire and rescue service against what we're setting out to achieve with regard to our targets. What we're trying to do as well is to try and make it less of a dry document than possibly it was before, including lots of infographics, some pictures, where it's a very minor thing, but the success of doing that is one of my colleagues who proofread it for me came back to say that they actually enjoyed proofreading this document, which isn't always the case with some of the documents that we produce. So hopefully it's achieving what we're setting out to achieve. I wasn't really going to say anything more about it than that, other than to make it available to yourselves and to say what we're asking the committee to do is to discuss and approve both the performance report for the first 2 months of this year and to discuss and approve the performance report for the last financial year. Really, any questions with regard to that?
Richard?
Simon, with the annual report, obviously we've looked at the figures every quarter, so there aren't any surprises there. With regard to you saying it's actually not a dry document, clearly you're a fire authority and not a local council, because I agree with you. And I do think local councils try to make things more impenetrable, less friendly than possible. So well done.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? Okay, so we need to discuss. We need to approve those two reports. I'll propose that we do so. Secondly, there. Okay, anybody against that? Abstentions? All in favour? Okay. Carried.
Thanks.
Simon.
Thank you very much.
Feel free to
To the General Manager.
So the next item is the transformation programme update. And presenting is Paul. Okay.
Board members, Chair, colleagues, Paul Jenkins, currently heading up the service transformation team with Avon Fire and Rescue Service. Purpose of today's report is for your information more than anything. There aren't any decisions to be made. Obviously, you know the decisions that have been made by the main fire authority meeting with regard to the budget and the transformation programme. So for myself, I would ask that you note the report, scrutinise its comments and make any recommendations, and obviously any questions as you see fit. Please feel free to stop me as I go through the report. You don't need to wait until the end. As members will know, the funding and expenditure has been approved until March 2023 for the transformation programme, which continues at a pace. Currently the budget stands at £2.473 million, as members will be aware, for the duration of the transformation programme. However, we're currently in a position where we're attracting an underspend currently for this month of £5,000 due to some unfilled vacancies, which I will come on to later within the report. And obviously during the new financial year 21-22 updates will be provided on the performance against the revenue and capital budgets for this transformation programme. These will be provided through a number of formats in the governance structure which has been agreed for the transformation programme. Some quick updates on progress. Since the last PRSC meeting, 2 project delivery officers have been appointed and joined the team, both of which were already currently serving Avon Fire and Rescue Service employees, one of which being a on-call firefighter and another that worked within our service workshops function. So they already have a good understanding of the organisation and have been able to hit the ground running and become integral members of the team immediately without having to go through the various things that would have been required to bring them up to speed with Avon Fire and Rescue Service. The digital project manager role, which has caused us some issues with regard to recruitment, had been re-advertised for a 3rd time, and we were successful in gaining a candidate who was due to begin in their post on the 12th of July 2021. so last week basically, which would have proven very beneficial to the team and would have helped us to progress our digital aspirations. However, shortly before taking up their post, the person was offered an alternative post which gave them better opportunities for their CV and a number of other issues. And despite my best efforts, that person has decided to take up that role and not join Avon Fire and Rescue Service as had been originally planned. Obviously that's a setback for the team. However, there are measures in place. The role has been re-advertised for a month in total. We've added it to the Association of Project Managers website, the NFCC website, South Gloss, Bristol and Baines, and all of the local recruitment websites. So hopefully we will receive suitable applicants for that role. Unfortunately, there weren't any unsuccessful applicants who would have been in a position to have been appointed to the role to save us going out to advertisement again. So that piece of work is taking place. Obviously, the digital project manager would have picked up the mantle of implementing a number of improvements to the Firewatch system that we currently use for staff and resource management. There is a secondary plan in place which will be to second someone into the team to lead on that piece of work whilst we recruit the new project manager, as the other elements of the process and policy improvements are at the stage where they will need implementation of certain elements of the Firewatch upgrades. The Firewatch upgrades will hopefully take place as and when the digital project manager is being recruited, and when the digital project manager comes into role, they'll be able to have a handover from the person on secondment, working in conjunction with our IT team and Firewatch and Infographics, the provider of Firewatch, in order then to bring that through seamlessly then and progress those initiatives going forward. From a information sharing perspective, the workplace transformation page has received a number of new members, and there's also a new Twitter account that has been produced, as we're aware that across the service and in the wider communities, people prefer to receive the information in very different ways. Working with corporate comms, we produced an introduction to the transformation program video, so if people just want to sit down and watch a short 10-minute video on what the transformation program is about and what it hopes to achieve, rather than have to read various documents or source various documents. Attached to the papers as Appendix 1 is the Transformation Programme Annual Report. This is for the first financial year which the Transformation Programme was in place, and as members will be aware, it includes an executive summary, achievements and critical success factors, effectiveness of the governance arrangements which have been put in place and agreed, and then lessons learned which we will use to influence the future years of the Transformation Programme. With regard to future activity, the future timeline of the Transformation Programme is attached as Appendix 2. This allows us to plan as we move forward, as obviously the Transformation Programme will reach across all areas of the service, so it's important we feel to have that timeline in place that other departments will be able to be aware of when and where they will be involved within the transformation journey. And obviously, as I've already mentioned, the plan in place for the new project manager to be recruited again, and obviously the measures we put in place using existing staff to cover that absence until we recruit. And with regard to the Audit, Governance and Ethics Committee, with the approval of the 2021 to 2022 audit plan, our internal auditors, RSM, have proposed to carry out an audit within the transformation team on the week commencing the 24th of January 2022. I know that seems quite a way off at the moment, but with the amount of work that we require to prepare what we need for the audit and to ensure we have a good audit outcome, then that's obviously will come around fairly quickly. And the scope will be agreed towards the end of 2021, but early indications are that the aim will be to consider the service's holistic approach to transformation and workstream project management, which is a piece of work that's one of the work packages within the transformation team at current. And the transformation team have produced a set of principles for the Service Leadership Board, which had been approved and signed off by the Service Leadership Board, as to how agile working will look and work as we move forward and come out of the current pandemic situation, as people are as the regulations change and people are encouraged to return to the workplace as opposed to working from home. So given the constrictions we have on the size of our workspaces, it was felt important that SLB gave that assurance to the service as to what agile working will look like going forward. With regard to risks, currently recorded on the corporate risk register as CRR 19 as change in transformation, and the current risk rating is 12, which is static and is a fairly low risk rating, as obviously the team has predominantly been built with a number of gaps to fill and the funding has been agreed. We currently sit as key objective 7 in the revised service plan for 2021 to 2024, and obviously we contribute to the service's priorities of making our service stronger, and also with the work that we're engaged in will make it a much better working environment for our staff, and therefore will improve our staff journeys through their careers. There's a number of background papers and appendices. I didn't intend to go into the appendices in any depth as I'm conscious of the time within the meeting and the time constraints. If anyone has any questions on the report or the appendices, please feel free to ask them.
Adam was first.
So, just about the project manager, really. Is the issue that, which is the problem quite often in local authorities, that we're not paying commercial rates, if that's the right expression to use, competitive salaries compared to what's available in the private sector?
It is, yes. Basically, the way the role remuneration is calculated using the Hay grading. The Hay grading comes out at a certain point, which is some considerable way below the usual market rate, which is obviously where we're having the issues in recruitment.
Yeah. Well, I don't claim to have the right
So how,
answer to that.
is there any way we can resolve that?
Does that need to be re-benchmarked?
Well, could I also add, I'm sorry to jump in, but one of my questions local authorities also have the chance to actually, clearly based upon experience, the post order could have a band of salary from minimum to maximum, but on top of that, one can often make a decision about perhaps increasing by 10% to reflect market need. Is that an option available to the fire authority?
There is an option to provide a market supplement. However, when we've applied that, the market supplement still doesn't bring it up to the...
Are you allowed to say figures, just so I got an understanding of how short it is?
No, am I?
Yeah, they're published. The Hay pay scales are published, so it's not
So
a
what
problem.
pay scale are we talking about?
The Hay scale would be between 41 and 43,000 pounds.
Oh, you're like 30 grand off the pace, 20 grand off the
Yeah,
pace.
it's I know.
I think maybe this is something we need to discuss with the HR department, and whether there's some sort of strategy or some way of fixing this issue.
Could I suggest also, and I'm trying to think actually with my HR experience in Bristol, bearing in mind this isn't a permanent position, does it need to actually fit into the officer's structure, and whether we could have treated it as a consultant, say,
If I could
able
come
to
back,
actually-
I can answer that. That doesn't work anymore. So there's a new tax legislation called IR35.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
you will get a consultant. So I deal with IT in my day job.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the most extreme example. Barclays Bank have decided they no longer employ consultants and everyone on PAYE, which is fine. So they employed lots of consultants on, for example, £1,000 a day. They collectively created a union, and now they have lots of program managers on about $750,000 a year because they don't want the tax liability. And so, because of the change in the legislation, because this would be a project manager, so they would probably be following instruction given to them. They're not deemed to be a consultant, although there is an exercise to go through, but crudely, they would probably be operating under direction of either the senior leadership team or the program manager. So they're not consulting, so therefore they fall inside, crudely is my understanding. And therefore, it's actually then more expensive to employ people on a fixed term contract than to employ a contractor.
I think if I may, Chair, because you're sorry, Councillor,
No,
you
no,
was
you
part
go.
of the same
You go.
question.
Well, yeah, Adam's kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but we've advertised this post 4 times now. Is it purely a case of the salary scale, or are there other issues that we're facing?
No, on the first 2 occasions the post was advertised, we were trying to combine an IT advisor for the whole service with the digital project manager role. However, that didn't attract any applicants on the one occasion. On the second occasion, the applicants simply didn't have the skill set to do the both roles. And on various discussions with members of SLB, which obviously Steve was party to, it was decided to split the roles back to the original structure of splitting the 2 roles, have an IT advisor within corporate services and then the digital project manager. But obviously, Angie Feeney, the Director of Corporate Services now, is in the same position, and I've had conversations with Angie around this, that the role that Angie would wish to fill within Corporate Services is going to encounter the same problems, whereby the salary offered for the role description will be much lower than the market rate within the outside of the public sector. So now I've got a meeting planned with Angie in the near future to discuss just how we can action this from both perspectives, from the digital project manager within transformation, and then obviously the role Angie's hoping to fill elsewhere within the service. So even though on the 3rd attempt this role was filled, the previous 2 attempts were asking for a very different role, with this role embroiled within it. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So obviously that's why we put the measure in place to bring someone in on secondment to more project manage the implementation using the skills of infographics who provide our IT for our people management and the firewatch system. Because we just simply can't keep trying and trying again. We're not trying the same thing every time, we're trying something different each time, but just still achieving the same result of being unable to fill the role, as Councillor has said, is a lot of it is around the remuneration and the pay being offered.
Chair, just a follow-up question to that. So this is purely an HR decision in terms of the salary and how you're going to move forward. How are you going to move forward on this? Because obviously you need to fill that role. You said you're going to bring someone in on secondment, but obviously more a long-term view of this. What's the next step in terms of what you're going to take in order to get this position filled eventually?
Yeah, well, the long-term view being working with Angie Feeney as the Director of Corporate Services. HR sits within Angie's directorate, is that Angie has obviously the directorship over HR to look at how we can achieve that and provide that salary which will attract the right applicant.
I will make sure it's taken up as an action point for HR and Director of Corporate Services. You will get another transformation programme update at the next meeting, so you'll have an update at that stage. If there's anything that I think you need to know before then, I'll make sure you get me.
Could I ask one further question? Sorry. Obviously, officers need to go away and try and address the finance salary issue. But since you had problem, and it's going to be key to actually filling it, of course, and you said the job spec has changed from 1, 2 to the 3rd round, but have you just gone out there and offered the post, or have you talked to it through specialist consultants? I know that obviously adds to the price, of course, but I'm just interested in how you've approached this.
Yeah, we've done it using the conventional ways in which we would advertise any post as a service, but I've also gone out to recruitment agencies that specialise in this field. The one agency were able to provide a number of candidates, which some did, some didn't meet the person's spec, and some we were able to interview. However, one of the other agencies had several conversations around how we could structure the role, what we could change, what we could provide and offer, and they did state that, to be honest, the lady I spoke to and said, this is the first time it's ever happened to me, but given what you're offering and what you're asking for, I can't offer you anyone at all to come for interview. And obviously from an agency perspective, it's their interest to send someone for an interview because that's how they make their money, isn't it? But
Does it need to be a full-time role? I mean, that's the only other element, that if the salary is not attractive as a full-time role, maybe the salary would be attractive if it was a part-time role and they could work for somebody else as well.
I think
Anyway.
I think Liz, quite right, the concerns and experience being shared in different local authorities with this similar issue, if you like, of trying to employ people in a certain job description and role without the finances being there. I think what Vaughan did touch base on there, the change in picture over the last sort of several months where they've been trying to employ somebody, but for the sake of a week or so we had someone. So it was in touching distance, wasn't it? But Vaughan's other comment, he is meeting with Director of Corporate Services and alternative measures can be explored at that point. I think it's probably the best way to come back to your action.
Then can I ask another question, which is completely tangent? You referred to agile working, so without getting too hung up on IT, when you referred to agile working, I assumed you meant the workplace rather than agile, as in agile scrums?
oh yeah, no, that wasn't agile script. That was
Agile is in agile
working, as in
workplace.
working from home, working
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the nearest station.
No, I just want to make sure I understood correctly. So.
Yeah, sorry, I was my
No. It was me probably not getting it, which wouldn't be the first time.
Okay, anything further on that? Any other thoughts? So we need to...
Yeah, can I just add, obviously, on the positives, it's fantastic what you've done over the last 12 months on this plan, so just a well done really, and obviously, don't let that small part discourage you in terms of the wider plan that you've actually brought to us, so well done.
No, yes, that is a sticking point, but I would say that the team that I'm lucky enough to have are absolutely excellent. So there are things would have stalled, but for the work with the team, they've been managed to progress them anyway. Are there any other project
Doesn't have to say that.
Okay, so we just need to note that report.
So you propose that we note?
Okay, yeah, I propose that we note.
Second.
Very good.
Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. Next item is the HMIC progress report, which Peter Davis will present.
Thank you, Chair, members, colleagues, good morning. My name is Pete Davis. I'm the Service Liaison Officer for Avon Fire and Rescue Service for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. And it's my usual gambit at that opening to say that I'm not going to be saying that at every stage that I want to refer to it. So the normal abbreviation is HMIC FRS for the benefit of any viewing members of the public subsequently on YouTube, but more frequently it will just be abbreviated to HMIC or even just to HMI, but that's what it means. So the paper today in front of you is for information, discussion and noting, and it presents to you your regular update against our round 1 inspection action plan, which resulted from that first round of inspection in 2018. For new members of the committee, you'll be interested to know that the first version of this round 1 inspection action plan was presented initially to the full Fire Authority on the 26th of March 2019, and the full Fire Authority thereafter delegated responsibility to the PRSC to receive an update at each of its subsequent meetings and to hold that remit for member-led scrutiny of the inspection action plan, which is provided at Appendix 1 and is the latest version approved for publication by the service leadership team. So that's currently, at the time of writing, it was version 1.30 dated the 17th of May, which is Appendix 1. The inspection action plan gets tabled to the service leadership team at each of its monthly meetings and is updated monthly. And then members receive the latest approved copy at each of the PRSC meetings. And I'm very conscious that it's now getting quite a lengthy document, but a couple of comments really, I suppose, on that. One is that it reflects the deliberate decision to include progress against all 15 of our areas for improvement and 3 causes of concern, which came out within our round 1 inspection report. So that was a very deliberate commitment to openness and transparency, including everything together in one place in terms of improvement. And also the way that we have managed managerial approval and member-led scrutiny of the inspection action plan gained favourable comment from HMI themselves during our recent round 2 inspection fieldwork, which I'll cover just a little bit later on. So I think members can be reassured that whilst the documentation is now towards the end of this round 1 inspection plan getting quite hefty, we've done things in a way that has gained approval from HMI themselves. So without going through the whole document itself, which I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear, I'll just draw members' attention to the summary table, which is on page 3 of my report number 10, or page 54 of your overall bundle. And that indicates progress since the last time that this inspection action plan was tabled to the PRSC. So you can see that we are making steady and continued improvement towards our completion of the 102 action points detailed within the plan. We are now at 90% complete, with 5% of the outstanding actions progressing on track, and the other 5% requiring some nudging to bring them back on track. But overall, 90% of our actions have been completed to the satisfaction of the service leadership team, which is, I think, really good progress. Any outstanding actions which have not been completed, and there will be some, because that's a deliberate, we know that some of these actions won't be completed by the time we publish our round 2 inspection action plan, simply because they do have, in one case, a 2-year planned completion date, because it's a programme of work. Those ones will be carried forward into our next iteration of the inspection action plan following publication of our next report, which I'll talk about shortly. Members will also just notice that the table on page 54 of your bundle is slightly different to the table which is on page 4 of the actual appendix. The differences in the figures are accounted for by the fact that the table on page 54 is comparing the actions to the last report which was tabled to you, as opposed to those figures on page 4 of the appendix are comparing against the last SLT update. So there's just a change in time there. So that provides an update for members on progress against our inspection action plan. I would also just like to draw members' attention to the section in your papers at paragraph 5.4, 5.5 and 5.6, which talks about our more recent round 2 inspection. So you may well recall that HMIC FRS have revisited us for their second round of all service inspections, and that was over a 6-week period, focusing mainly on virtual interviews, focus groups, and other inspection activity, but also including some in-person, on-site reality testing at many of our fire stations. So that was completed in the 6 weeks up until the 18th of June. And at the time of writing this report, we hadn't at the time received any feedback from the inspectors as to their findings. That initial post-inspection debrief was provided to Service Leadership Board members on the 5th of July. And whilst it is, it presented tentative findings which are subject to confirmation once HMI have analysed all of the evidence which they have collated over their 6 weeks of fieldwork. The good news is that it was much more positive, and HMI have acknowledged significant progress against virtually all of our areas for improvement, and indeed against all of our causes of concern. So we don't yet have any formalised feedback to be able to share in public session. That will come once the HMI publish our second inspection report in the winter of 2021. But we will, in the autumn, receive a draft report for factual accuracy checking, and then that will then be published in the public domain in what HMI are calling winter 2021, so we wait for an exact date. But the take-home message from that is that the feedback was positive, and they've acknowledged that progress against many of our areas for improvement identified in round one, so that's good news. So members, I'll pause there and I'm happy to take any questions.
No questions per se, but just to say, members love the reports which say 90% of our goals have been achieved and the other 10% are on course. So well done, but more seriously, well done to you and your team for actually tackling this so effectively. I'm also impressed by the feedback we've had since from the inspectorate. All I would say is, once again, you prove this as our authority, because Bristol City Council would never cope with reality testing.
Thank you, Councillor.
So the report, the audit that was just completed, I appreciate you get a report for accuracy checking, so that makes sense. Is that shared with members at that point, or is it shared with members at the point it is a public document?
In the last round, it was shared at the point of publication. Yeah.
So then, from a scrutiny perspective, and I appreciate you guys are not sitting back and not doing anything, but how do members then challenge the implementation of the recommendations?
I think there are two different things you mentioned. So the report itself, obviously, we have an ability to input on factual accuracy, and that's the officers who do that piece of work for you. When they've then published their report, that will come to you both at this committee but also at the full fire authority, because obviously every member needs to be aware of it. And then the officers, presumably through our liaison officer, will submit the planned action plan as a result of that report to you all as members. I think that normally goes to full fire authority, doesn't it?
And do the two documents, are they presented side by side, or because I can understand why one would follow the other,
yes,
if that makes sense, because clearly you're going to receive a document and you're not going to have a response immediately, although I'm assuming once you receive the interim document, you'll start working on following up. So I'm just trying to understand, I don't have a problem, I'm just trying to understand timeline.
So the formal publication of the report into the public domain will be around the winter 2021, and then we have 56 days from the point of formal publication to develop and submit our action plan to HMI, and that will, before submission to HMI, come to the authority for approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that
That's
doesn't
the bit I hadn't
align,
understood.
so if it doesn't align with our meeting calendar, what we can do is an extraordinary meeting. If
Which we
needed,
guess
at
we
the
have
fire
to, isn't it?
authority. So I would imagine that's important, because we don't know exactly when it's going to land, do we, at the moment?
That's right. I mean, if you recall, back in 2018, we had that same winter 2018, winter 2018 publication date, and actually that subsequently got put back a bit because of the snap general election at the time. So depending on circumstances at the time, we'll dictate the exact publication date. but then the regulations in terms of us submitting a plan will be 56 days from publication. Although formally, we only have to submit an action plan to HMI to cover any causes of concern. We don't necessarily have to submit an action plan for their information according to that 56-day deadline for areas for improvement.
Okay.
Yeah. But as I said at the beginning, we took a deliberate action or
Yeah, we
took a
do
decision
remember
to
that.
include them all together in the interests of openness and transparency.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Jen.
Sounds like we're going to be busy then. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, right, next,
So the recommendation
sorry, yeah,
is to note.
I propose that we note our reports. Everyone in favour of noting?
Aye.
So the next item is the capital programme update. And we have Claire Bentley from Finance.
Thank you. Good morning, members, colleagues. So I'm going to just quickly introduce. Oh, sorry, it's Claire Bentley, Head of Finance for Avon Fire and Rescue Service. So I'm going to quickly talk you through the update which we've submitted for the capital programme. So the final figures for 2020-21, and then what the impact of that is onto the 2021-22 capital programme. So it was reported in January of this year that we were forecasting an underspend on the capital programme of £5,147,000. That has increased slightly, so our actual forecast overspend at the end of the year, final underspend, was £5,896,000. Now, the majority of that change relates to some of our large premises schemes around the Bedminster and Avonmouth projects. What I can confirm is that actually within the first 2 months of this financial year, that spend has been made. So we've had £496,000 spent year to date, and £489,000 of that has been on our premises budget. So there are a number of reasons for those delays. There have been some technical issues in terms of the projects themselves, but also we're still dealing with issues around the COVID pandemic and the delays that is causing in terms of additional social distancing measures, obviously the number of people being able to be on the sites. So that's just a brief overview of the report which you've had. And it's just really for noting that change. So that means, in effect, that our original budget on capital for 2021-22 was £7,959,000, and that's increased from last year's underspend to £8,708,000. And that's currently being funded through, the majority of it through capital receipts, which we received for the old Temple HQ. And it may be towards the end of the year that we will have to explore some additional borrowing, but we've already got that in hand through our colleagues at the City Council. So that's really all I would like to say about the report. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, so Claire might be able to answer questions on the finance aspect, but maybe not on the specifics of the projects.
Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Claire, could I address myself to the Bedminster issue? The station's actually not in my ward, but is about 600 yards from where I live. So I do have almost territorial interest. Obviously, it's been ongoing for some time. Now I see it's in the hands of mediation. Do we have a rough timeline of how long that would have taken? And once it's concluded, I suppose there's a timeline which will allow the interested parties to settle.
Well, I think in the report that has been included with the papers, which we've spoken with our premises team on, they're projecting it's not likely to be for Q3 of this year that we'll see a completion. And obviously, again, that's subject to a number of different issues. So we will be reporting to each of these meetings on the progress of that. And what I'll make sure is that there's a clear timeline. So when we come back in October, we hopefully will have some more detail on that one. But certainly I can request that, so, and it'll be included.
The general description's on page 178 of your bundle, but I appreciate it's maybe not as detailed as you'd like. So more detail next time.
Any other questions? No. Okay then. Thank you Claire.
So you're
So we
asked
just
to
need to note that report. I propose we note it. All in favour of noting? Thank you. And we move on to the Grenfell Tower inquiry update.
Thank you, Chair. Members, for your awareness, I wasn't the author of this report. The author couldn't be with us today because of he's currently undertaking the fire investigation at the fire in Bristol earlier in the week, which is quite a complex fire investigation. So I'll do my best to convey a summary overview of the report and answer any questions that you may have. The report is a standard agenda item, and it's again similar to some of the other reports today, highlighting our progress in relation to our Grenfell Fire Action Plan within service. The recommendation is for members to note the report, discuss its contents, and obviously make any comments that you wish. Just by way of brief background, the service approach in response to the Grenfell inquiry was outlined to the committee. It was a meeting in January 2020, and obviously the background papers reflect that. However, in summary, for the new members to the authority, gap analysis was undertaken within service after the Grenfell fire and the Phase 1 report landed to try and identify where improvements could be made within service against the recommendations of the Grenfell inquiry report. Okay. In Section 4, we were allocated some grant funding to support the need to make changes where possible. That was consistent across the country. Section 4 highlights the overall sort of expenditure, how that breaks down roughly. The main areas of expenditure were on staff costs, where we employed a CAD technician to assist with some of the development of high-rise building plans that we have within service. Smoke hoods that we've procured and they're due to go on the run imminently. So we'll have smoke hoods on all our frontline appliances. And also additional software and IT infrastructure to support high-rise premise risk information being shared from the incident ground back up to our service control. So they're the main areas of expenditure that is referenced, if you like, within Section 4. Within Section 5 of your paper, Section 5 is pretty much where you get an indication of where the progress is being made against the 29 internal actions outlined in our Grenfell improvement project, if you like. The Section 5 is broken down into internal actions and external actions. Internal actions are those that we have control over as a service, and we monitor, and hence the table in the pie chart in Section 5. However, the external actions are those that we're not really owners of, but we have a vested interest in, and we work with partners in relation to monitoring their progress against some of those actions, because that can impact on our route safety and also community safety. And there's also crossover and partnership working where applicable, and there's a couple of examples, Bristol City Council being one, the work we've been doing with them and their high-rise properties, and then also with the team, the Grenfell team, engaging with the University of Lancaster National Fire Chief Council over some national work streams, so we're not working in isolation. So that's probably a brief overview, but I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for that. Just on the external report, EA1 and EA2, on the training day that we attended the other week, speaking to some of the crew, I asked in terms of getting the plans in for the buildings that we do cover within Avon, where we were on that, and they said they're starting to get plans in, but it's not nearly enough complete in order to make sure that we're at the level that we require going to fires that we attend. How long do you think it's going to take for us to receive those plans? And what measures have we taken to ensure that building owners and are getting those plans to us as we possibly can do and updated the system?
Yeah, I think it's a work in progress. Is the best I could probably answer that, Councillor. I think we are working as much as we possibly can be with local authority. A predominant one obviously is Bristol with the amount of high-rise properties that it has, and best efforts are being made. It's not as simplistic as sometimes operational crews may like it to be in the multi-agency working, but also then the software infrastructure issues that we have, the employment of a CAD technician, like I said, to develop those plans with individual building owners, whether they're local authority or other. But the programme team or the project team, we believe we're on track in a majority of the cases that we're within our control. The rest will continue to work with partners as best we can.
Just a follow-up. It's a very open-ended question, I guess oversimplified, but what timescale are we working to get those plans in? I guess you're working to a timescale to have a full database?
The Grenfell work, the timescale that we've set ourselves, if you like, certainly with most of the internal actions, is December this year, as is noted in the report. And other than a couple of areas that are outside our control, that's what we're aiming for as a provisional timeline. But the external actions, again, it's very much working in collaboration with shifting sands at times, isn't it? And I'd like to be able to give you a definitive. But what I will do in relation to those two that you have referenced is get your feedback as to when that is, at this moment in time, anticipated for completion.
Can I ask a question then? To appreciate your...
Richard first.
My apologies.
I'll come to you afterwards.
Ben's largely stolen my thunder, but regarding the internal actions, did the original inquiry set a timeline for fire authorities to conclude their work?
No, we did. No, so it's, as is referenced in the report, the recommendations aren't a statutory requirement per se. So, but what we've done ourselves, as a number 11 fire and rescue service, proactive in identifying the areas that we knew we could get hold of and then drive forward. We set ourselves an informal aim, if you like, to December 21 this year, to the end of December this year, but that's very much our own target. There's no other sort of requirement per se. So again, reassurance, been proactive, both with the internal ones obviously, and the external ones as much as we can be, but I'll try and get you a more clear stance in relation to those two.
I was just going to ask, if the bottleneck is local authorities, and you've not said that is the case, clearly, is there, my question is there any leverage that elected members sitting on this can bring to move things along in terms of Parliament?
No, I would, I'll pass that on to colleagues within the team. If there is
I'm
any
sure
assistance.
any member would more than that.
Yeah, but to really recognise local authorities are going through their own challenges.
No, absolutely.
No, I think, and Adam's point has been raised before I raised it at committee. And for example, I wanted to know if we as a planning authority responded effectively to your requests in planning applications, but clearly we're here as interested parties and could obviously use our influence to the best effect if you wish.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor. No, again, I'll pass that on.
Okay. Any other questions or points? Excellent. We need to link that. Yeah, link that report. So, okay. All right. So moving on to item 13, renewable energy and low carbon contract.
Environmental manager. How are you? Okay, right. Elevated status. Yeah, so on behalf of the environmental manager at Avon Fire and Rescue Service. So, morning everybody. I won't go through report again, but just to briefly summarise. In May, we awarded a contract to contractor SolarSense to design, supply and install low carbon and renewable energy technologies on a number of our sites. This initially, this is to deliver the majority of funding that we got from the government's public sector decarbonisation fund, for which we received £820,000, and the low carbon and renewable energy technology contract will be delivering approximately 650,000 of that grant funding. So I'm pleased to report that after sort of quite a period, well, since May, of sort of design, getting approvals, planning, etc., the works are now underway. They started this week with the PV solar installation at Southmead Station, and we've got a sort of full programme in place to deliver the rest of the PV, the solar thermal, the air source heat pump and the battery systems by the deadline, which is the end of September this year. So whilst we are in theory on track, we have got a number of issues to overcome. One of them being problems or lack of sort of electrical capacity and supply to some of our stations. This is an issue which we're in active discussions with Western Power, and we are also experiencing supply chain delays, particularly on things like electrical equipment. So we've reported both of these to the grant administrators, Salix, and interestingly enough, they put out a newsletter last week, their first sort of newsletter about the scheme itself. And obviously those are issues that an awful lot of other organisations are coming up against as well. So we're currently working with our contractor to try and find some workarounds, which Salix are really interested to know more about, because they're hoping they can apply them to other fund recipients. So what we're hoping and in fact I've got a call with them later today, I'm hoping we can, again, sort of in the discussions, perhaps seek provisional approval for the sort of final commissioning and connection of some of the technologies after the grant deadline, and having discussed these issues with colleagues, for example, at Bristol City Council, who have the same funding from the same grant, it seems that Salix are fairly amenable to that. So that would help enormously. So to date, Salix we submit a monthly report, and there's obviously an example of that appended to my report. So Salix have approved all of our monthly reports and payment requests so far, and to date we've received just over £250,000. So I just wanted to say, beyond the sort of contract, the low carbon and renewable energy technology section of the funding, we've also implemented a number of other measures sort of around energy efficiency, insulation, LED lighting, better sort of controls, etc. on our stations. That's pretty well complete now. Another aspect of the funding is that for any sites where we're not immediately decarbonising the heat source, i.e. putting in things like heat pumps, that we produce a heat decarbonisation plan for all of those other sites. That work is ongoing. We have some external sort of consultants, energy and carbon consultants who are working on that at the moment, so that also is on target to be delivered in the timescales. I also wanted to mention that prior to getting the it's very wordy, isn't it? Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme funding, PSDS funding. We also successfully got some small grants through a scheme called the Low Carbon Skills Fund, which would help facilitate our application for the main grant. We've recently been audited on one of those skill fund grants, and we've just had the report in from the auditors who concluded that we have they found a substantial level of assurance. They had no issues to raise, and I think this really validates sort of the risk control processes we have in place in our procurement and finance, which is great. And last but not least, I also just wanted to inform members and colleagues that just yesterday, the day before, we've been contacted by the Cabinet Office, who have identified Avon Fire and Rescue Service as being one of the leading lights in terms of climate action in the southwest, and they want to come over to our service area next week to film some of the environmental measures we've got in place and talk to myself and other colleagues about what we're doing, what our plans are. So this is obviously all in the run up to COP26 in November, and I just think would be, is a great opportunity for us to really showcase some of the great work that we're doing as an organisation. And I think this really reflects a huge amount of work that's been put in with sort of limited people resources within the service, but also the level of support and ambition demonstrated by the Fire Authority and senior management, and also last but not least that we have a number of extremely committed contractors who are working with us on our sort of climate action journey. So,
can I ask you one question?
Yes.
So there's a really good bit in your report which you haven't mentioned.
Right.
Which is the contractor spotting an issue in the supply chain, which I think is important for members to know, that they're being proactive about such issues. Would you mind just telling us about that?
Yeah, definitely. So it was a contractor, SolarSense, who raised this issue that a report had been published identifying a number of solar panel manufacturing companies as being at risk of there being forced labour in their supply chains, and the manufacturer who was specified at the time to supply all of the solar panel technology for our projects was one of the companies listed at risk of using forced labour within their supply chain. So we made the decision that despite the fact that we'd probably incur small additional cost and some complications, that we would change the technology supplier because we felt that it wasn't worth it wasn't worth the risk, and we wouldn't want to be knowingly using products manufactured in questionable supply chains.
It's really good that it was spotted and action was taken. Obviously it's concerning that these things are happening. Ben, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Annabelle, you just mentioned obviously the thing that Amanda just brought up Obviously, being new to this committee and new to this plan, obviously, I guess we've done environmental decarbonisation before. Would I be correct in saying that, or is this a new? Okay. The manufacturer, the technology provider that we've moved on from, have we used them before in different projects? And is there anything within Avon at this moment in time which is being used by that which is from that company that you know about?
Not to my knowledge. All the other solar PV projects that I've been involved in implementing haven't used that particular manufacturer. But actually, a number of, sort of the biggest global solar PV manufacturers were named in the report. So there quite a number of public sector organisations and companies around the UK who are currently wondering what to do, having ordered millions of pounds worth of kit from these manufacturers. The problem is often the supply chains are not particularly clear, but we just felt it was worth that, and I think Sadie's appreciated us raising that particular issue.
Thank you. Richard.
Mel, again, thanks for your helpful report. You clearly indicated we're on top course, of course, but you've also highlighted some problems, which is helpful. In my experience, central government has an uncanny propensity to actually try to call red flags. If you do hit deadlines or whatever, is there any risk of this here?
No, because we only make a payment request once we've received an invoice sort of from a contractor, so we weren't paid, the whole, we weren't paid the grant up front. So we're being very careful that we are not submitting or even requesting invoices from contractors until we know that everything's lined up. We've got all the approvals, the timelines are realistic, etc.
Anything else? Questions?
I'd just like to add, Chair, if I may, appreciate the fact that Councillor Nutland is obviously new to authority, but Annabelle very quickly went over a number of people there that supported the project and the application for the funding, but the reality is the driving force has been Annabelle in extremely short timelines. There, I think most government grant funding reasons for it being time limited, as was already mentioned. Annabelle has driven this from start to finish and it is on track as much as possibly can be with a timeline that is almost ending. It's been amazing.
And that's why it was sent by the Fire Authority to this committee, because the timeline didn't align with the full Fire Authority having that oversight, so it was delegated to this committee for that reason.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did you have another question? Vince?
No.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we just need to note the report. So propose we note it. In favour? Right, that's the report. So the next item is the date of the next meeting, which is the 8th of October, 10:30. You got a venue for that?
I think provisionally we're going for the headquarters, but it depends what the restrictions are in place, so we will confirm the details.
Okay. So I'll move that, so that's the date of the next meeting.
Can we just second it? Yeah.
Okay. And so then we have to exclude the press and the public for the next item. So I just need to read this out. To resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following item of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A Part 1 of the Local Government Act 1972, and that in accordance with Schedule 12A Part 2 and Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I propose that. Do I have a second?
Aye.
All in favour? Okay. So Mark, if you'd like to stop the recording, please.